Sit across from your partner and simply stare into each other's eyes. Depending on how far apart you sit, you might have to pick one eye to focus on. Continue to hold each other's gaze without speaking. Ignore laughter and other signs of discomfort. This practice can be combined with other techniques described in this book, especially mindfulness of breathing and Douglas Harding's inquiry into headlessness. Witnessing the misadventures of supposedly enlightened adepts and their devotees can be depressing, but it can also be amusing. I wrote about one such example in my first book, The End of Faith. I know a group of veteran spiritual seekers who, after searching for a teacher among the caves and dells of the Himalayas for many months, finally discovered a Hindu yogi who seemed qualified to lead them into the ethers. He was as thin as Jesus, as limber as an orangutan, and wore his hair matted down to his knees. They promptly brought this prodigy to America to instruct them in the ways of spiritual devotion. After a suitable period of acculturation, our ascetic, who was incidentally both admired for his physical beauty and for the manner in which he played the drum, decided that sex with the prettiest of his patrons' wives would suit his pedagogical purposes admirably. These relations were commenced at once, and endured for some time by a man whose devotion to wife and guru, it must be said, was now being sorely tested. His wife, if I'm not mistaken, was an enthusiastic participant in this, quote, tantric exercise, for her guru was both fully enlightened and as dashing a swain as Lord Krishna. Gradually, this saintly man further refined his spiritual requirements, as well as his appetites. The day soon dawned when he would eat nothing for breakfast but a pint of Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream topped with cashews. We might well imagine that the meditations of a cuckold, wandering the frozen food aisles of a supermarket in search of an enlightened man's enlightened repast, were anything but devotional. This guru was soon sent back to India with his drum. Ice cream for breakfast. That may tell us everything we need to know. And yet there is no way around the fact that in spiritual matters, as in all others, we must seek instruction from those whom we deem to be more accomplished than ourselves, and the signs of accomplishment are not always clear. With spirituality, the subject matter and the apparent distance between teacher and student seem to create the perfect conditions for self-deception, and thus for misplaced and exploited trust. It is possible, however, with a bit of luck and discrimination, to bypass such problems while still receiving teachings from those who are wiser and more experienced in these matters than oneself. I offer my own case as a not entirely unusual example. Throughout my 20s, I studied with many teachers who functioned as gurus in the traditional sense, but I never had a relationship with any of them that I find embarrassing in retrospect, or that I wouldn't currently recommend to others. I don't know whether to attribute this to good luck, or to the fact that there was a line of devotion I was never tempted to cross. Traditionally, one is admonished to view one's guru as perfect. I confess that I could never take this advice seriously, other than in the trivial sense that consciousness itself might be considered perfect in some way, or that a perfect realization of its intrinsic freedom might be possible. Despite how impressive many of my teachers were, they were undoubtedly human and susceptible to the same cultural biases and physical infirmities that define the lives of ordinary people. For instance, when it came time for Punjaji to marry off his niece, he could think of nothing more enlightened than to publish her picture in the singles section of the local newspaper, after having paid a photographer to lighten the color of her skin by several shades. This practice was ubiquitous in India at the time, and considered entirely normal. To my eye, however, it was at once deceitful, demeaning, and expressive of bigotry toward people with dark skin. I could only conclude that either Enlightenment failed to clear the mind of such cultural residues, or Punjaji had yet to achieve full enlightenment. In either case, I couldn't view his solution to the problem of marriage as perfect. The gurus I have met personally, as well as those whose careers and teachings I have studied at a distance, range from crooks who could be quickly dismissed, to teachers who were brilliant but flawed, to those who, while still human, seemed to possess so much compassion and clarity of mind that they were nearly flawless examples of the benefits of spiritual practice. This last group is of obvious interest, and these are surely the people one hopes to meet, but the middle group can be helpful as well. Some teachers about whom depressing stories are told, men and women whose indiscretions may seem to discredit the very concept of spiritual authority, are in fact talented contemplatives. Many of these people get corrupted by the power and opportunities that come with inspiring devotion in others. Some may begin to believe the myths that grow up around them, and some are guilty of ludicrous exaggerations of their own spiritual and historical significance. Caveat emptor. Of course, there can be clear indications that a teacher is not worth paying attention to. A history as a fabulist or con artist should be considered fatal. Thus, the spiritual opinions of Joseph Smith, Gurdjieff, and L. Ron Hubbard can be safely ignored. A fetish for numbers is also an ominous sign. Math is magical, but math approached like magic is just superstition, and numerology is where the intellect goes to die. Prophecy is also a very strong indication of chicanery or madness on the part of the teacher, and of stupidity among his students. One can extrapolate from scientific data or technological trends, climate models, Moore's law, but most detailed predictions about the future lead to embarrassment right on schedule. Anyone who can confidently tell you what the world will be like in 2027 is delusional. The channeling of invisible entities, whether broadcast from beyond the grave or from another galaxy, should provoke only laughter. J.Z. Knight, who has long claimed to be the mouthpiece for a 35,000-year-old entity named Ramtha, is the ultimate example of how you don't want your teacher to sound. And any suggestion that a guru has influenced world events through magic should also put an end to the conversation. Sri Aurobindo and his partner, known as the Mother, apparently claim to have decided the outcome of World War II with their psychic powers. In that case, one wonders why they weren't held morally responsible for not having ended it sooner. Yet another reason to ignore Aurobindo's long, unreadable books. Generally speaking, you should head for the door at any sign of deception on the part of a teacher. Admittedly, you might want to make certain allowances for cultural differences and for the harmlessness of the lie. On one occasion, a very great Dzogchen master, truly one of the most inspiring people I've ever met, declared that a certain day of our retreat would be one of vegetarian austerity, which, from a Tibetan point of view, was an actual sacrifice. Sometime after lunch, I entered his room and caught him in flagrante delicto, furtively eating a steak out of tin foil. The moment he saw me, this devilish old lama wadded the foil into a ball and chucked it to his wife like a quarterback delivering a lateral pass. She then hurled it across the room, where it made a distinctly moist thud in the back of a closet. Needless to say, we all had a very good laugh over these machinations, and it was not the sort of deception that seemed calculated to manipulate students or to falsely elevate the status of the teacher. In fact, this teacher did not elevate himself at all, a quality that can compensate for many other sins. I have never encountered a spiritual teacher who I thought was fully enlightened in the sense that many Buddhists and Hindus imagine is possible. That is, stably free of the illusion of the self and endowed with clairvoyance and other miraculous powers. While I remain open to evidence of psi phenomenon, clairvoyance, telepathy, and so forth, the fact that they haven't been conclusively demonstrated in the lab is a very strong indication that they do not exist. Researchers who study these things allege that the data are there, and that proof of psi can be seen in departures from randomness that occur over thousands of experimental trials. But people who believe that their guru has supernormal powers aren't thinking in terms of weak statistical effects. They believe that a specific person can reliably read minds, heal the sick, and work other miracles. I have yet to see a case in which evidence for such abilities was presented in a credible way. If one person on Earth possessed psychic powers to any significant degree, this would be among the easiest facts to authenticate in a lab. Many people have been duped by traditional evasions on this point. It's often said, for instance, that demonstrating such powers on demand would be spiritually uncouth, and that to even want such empirical evidence is an unflattering sign of doubt on the part of a student. Except ye see signs and wonders ye will not believe. John 4:48. A lifetime of foolishness and self-deception awaits anyone who won't call this bluff. But one need not believe in psychic powers to cut through the illusion of the self. Accomplishing this can be elusive enough. If I've ever met a person who has done so perfectly, I am unaware of it. I have studied with several people who were assumed to be fully enlightened in that sense, and even some who made the claim explicitly. But as far as I can tell, this added nothing of value to their teachings, while introducing a distracting note of grandiosity into the conversation. Whether or not it's possible for someone to have a permanent experience of self-transcendence, a student's conviction that a teacher is fully enlightened seems superfluous, and it is usually cast in doubt by something silly the teacher says or does in any case. Once again, I believe that too much can be made of the failures of spiritual teachers or of the pathologies found among their followers, as though such pratfalls discredit the guru-disciple relationship in principle. One might draw a useful analogy to marriage here. Examples of bad marriages, or at least unenviable ones, are everywhere to be seen, and few seem to live up to the institution's promise. Focusing on scenes of domestic misery, one might easily conclude that the very idea of marriage is flawed, and that human beings should find a better way to arrange themselves and to raise children. I think this conclusion would be reckless. Although I've yet to find a spiritual community that appeared worth joining, and signs of trouble are very easy to spot, I have known many people who learned a great deal by spending extended periods of time in the company of one or another spiritual teacher, and I have learned indispensable things myself. All this may raise a concern about whether the ideal of enlightenment is a false one. Is true freedom even possible? It certainly is in a momentary sense, as any mature practitioner of meditation knows, and those moments can increase in both number and duration with practice. Therefore, I see no reason why a person couldn't perfectly banish the illusion of the self. However, just the ability to meditate, to rest as consciousness for a few moments prior to the arising of the next thought, can offer a profound relief from mental suffering. We need not come to the end of the path to experience the benefits of walking it.